So that was a great exercise there in the first half where we did a go around and got to contemplate how these dualistic sides of ourselves, the right and the left brain hemispheres, the shamanistic and the scientific, are functioning as appendages to this egoic self that is the theme of this class. And in the second half, I wanted to begin with just a succinct review of some of what we've been looking at so far. And in doing that, I actually created a slideshow, everything you need to know about the ego. I will put the link to the slideshow in the Google Doc so you can go and look at what I've created so far, as well as what will be added to it over the weeks. So, yeah, just going back to where we started with the Freudian perspective of the ego and these three different parts of ourselves, the id, the ego, and the superego. Don't need to spend a lot of time looking at this, but how the ego is in the middle between the id, the earthly urges, the drives and instincts that can be destructive if unchecked. And so somehow we need to employ a superego or supraego. Could start with our parents, then school, religion, peers, civil law, etc. The etc., of course, could be ourselves. We can ultimately become our own superego to our own ego. Wouldn't that be novel? Mm-hmm. And then the Jungian perspective, similar, but looking at the ego, he added a new concept of the self and how the ego, which means I in Latin, this I awareness is at the center of this growing self. And then additionally, all of this is under the covering of the personality or the persona or the mask. I also created a slide of other concepts introduced by Jung, and I'm not going to take the time to go through them, but he came up with interesting concepts and words to point to different parts of really our invisible nature. We're not looking at physical things here. We're looking at invisible things that express themselves. So, we talked about synchronicity, the relationship of the inner and the outer, the shadow. This is the unconscious contents of the mind. Projection, where we project unconscious content onto others rather than owning it. This is something he worked with Freud, as well as the idea of transference, when someone redirects their feelings about one person onto someone else. They transfer their feelings. Like you may have feelings of irritation about men in authority, because of your father, the way he treated you, and then you transfer that to me because I'm a male here sitting, as a teacher. So that would be an incident of transference. Then there is the anima and animus. This is the unconscious inner masculine and inner feminine. Syzygy, which is the integration of opposites. The collective unconscious. This is the universal unconscious content that all humanity is plugged into. Basically, it's in the background of our minds. And then the archetypes. Like there's the magician archetype, the warrior, the king, the lover, the mother, the father, the child. These are all really the jester and the clown. These are the archetypes or the architecture that make up the psyche and get acted out. Then to bring us up to where we left off last week was this idea of Jung's evolution of the ego-brain orientation, which I find more and more quite compelling in understanding something that's dynamic. Freud's model is a bit static. It's like, okay, it's very earthly. It's, things are looking for material cause in Freud's model. And so it's pinning everything down to kind of a static physical cause. Whereas in Jung's evolution, he's looking at how the dynamic is moving forward towards something. So in his model of things, he's seen how things started really with more of a right brain predominance in the primitive human, where we enjoyed more of a visionary or shamanistic state, more otherworldly. We were connected more, quite naturally, to the spiritual world, and that's been lost. It was more tribal based and less egocentric. It was more about the collective and less about the individual. And one learned about the environment by merging with it because the right brain allowed for that. There was no impedance. It was highly subjective, that the subject was merged with the object. And that's how things were known. Then in the ancient human being, there was this shifting from the right brain activity coming more into the body, less otherworldly, and coming more into the body and into the senses. And I think we see that in the ancient Indian tradition and the Egyptian, where people are doing more in the material world. Certainly in the Egyptian times, we see, massive moving of matter, of rocks and stones, and building these edifices. And it was up to the leaders really to stay connected to the higher planes through their subtle energies coming down from above through the crown chakra and so forth. The leaders, such as the guru, was the one who was responsible to maintain that connection and bring it down to the disciple. Or the images of the pharaohs in the Egyptian times with their different hats and headpieces, where it wasn't just a fashion statement, but was really indicating some of their spiritual development and their role to be the antenna, the connector to these higher planes of existence, which en masse was being lost. En masse, the connection was being lost because of this turning away from the spiritual world more to the material world, as there was this transition from right brain towards the left brain functioning. So then in the modern human, there's a left brain predominance with new forms of logical thinking, as seen in the Greek period, with the birth of philosophy, thinking about existence, questions about existence. This was new. Before that, it was about surviving or just a natural knowing that, oh, I'm a spiritual being and our ancestors are there. It was just a natural knowing. We lost that natural knowing, and what Rudolf Steiner calls atavistic clairvoyance. It was an older clairvoyance that got lost, but we birthed new forms of thinking and analysis through philosophy, of course, democracy, thinking about the state rather than just being a natural tribal thing with one person at the head and they dictated. Now every individual had a vote and was recognized, having their rights within the state. Of course, birth of science, mathematics, and it was more egocentric because of this left brain orientation. And because of this awakening of the ego, the learning became more through objectification, where, well, I'm here and you're there, and like I have to look at you as an object. I'm a subject that has a relationship to an object. And also skepticism, questioning everything. There was no questioning in the primitive human in the same sense. Now, the modern human is questioning everything, and how delicious that is. Diving into the left brain and just like, looking around through the senses and awakening to this outer world, while at the same time losing this connection to the inner world. And then lastly, the contemporary human, which is today's human, but it'll be today's human tomorrow, going into the future. And the objective be to balance the use of both hemispheres and to have the capacity to move between your own ego center and non-egocentric. And we did that in the opening meditation, where we sat with a sense of our own center, and then we moved out from that. First to the left. Oh, there's a center beside me. Oh, I can awaken to that. And then, oh, I have a center to the right as well. And then to feel all the centers together in a collective. Not the same way the tribal was. In the tribal state, it was more of a dreamy type of connection that was just naturally there. Now it's like, oh, I have to make the choice. I have to make the effort to feel it, to acknowledge it, to go out beyond this growing ego center, because it's something that's growing. We're not going to turn it back. It's going to get stronger. To be, and then with that strength, it allows us to go beyond itself, but then also to return to oneself, to have that breathing, to have ego breathing between the self and other. So there's my slideshow, and I will put that up in the Google Doc for you to enjoy.
For sharing that, you added a lot of layers to it from last week, like just as you spoke about it.
And we need to keep layering this on to get these concepts, to get them into our flow of thinking and perception of things. This is the beauty of left brain thinking, is it names something, it's a concept, we can take it in or not. We have to organize it with our other thoughts. Yeah, this is the modern way of science. Yes, please.
Sure. So with how there's like some tribes being found now that have not been exposed to external civilizations. So what would their state of ego and consciousness be in, given that they haven't gotten that level of questioning and experiencing and being so objective towards things? So would they still be in that dream state?
Absolutely. Yeah. People are at different places. In the earth, there's pockets of people at all different states of being. And that's the beauty of diversity culturally, because it provides a rich bed culturally for people to experience different states of consciousness. And people may need to incarnate and be held within more of a tribal type of thing, where it's just tell me what to do, assign my place, assign my task. For whatever reason, they may need that. And that's, because as a Waldorf school teacher, actually, it's an incredible curriculum, because a child has to recapitulate all these earlier stages before it can actually come into a modern and contemporary mindset. So within the womb of a Waldorf classroom, the early grades, a child's looked at as actually living in an earlier state of consciousness and an earlier space and time. And the curriculum and the teacher has to cater to that. They're not modern thinkers. They're still in that dreamy, a grade 1 classroom, it's a tribe. And you don't even differentiate much between male and female at that stage. It's all very homogeneous. And then they can grow from that earlier state into diversification and individuation. So by the time they reach the end of high school, they can step into a modern and a contemporary mindset, because they've gone back to the beginning. Just like in the womb, every time a new child is conceived, it goes back to the beginning again as a unicellular being. So I like to think of it, where we go from being a unicellular being to a unicellular being, where we are our own self. Start as a physical unicellular and then become a unicellular spiritual being in our evolution. So coming to tonight's theme, which is the Eastern spiritual perspective of the ego. And this is going to be kind of paired with next week. Just like the first 2 weeks was Freud and Jung paired together. This week is the Eastern spiritual perspective, and it's going to be paired with next week's the Western spiritual perspective. And to get this rolling, I'm going to read portions of something of a discourse given by an Eastern spiritual teacher. And his name is Osho. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh was his original name. And then for various reasons, a few years before he died, he changed to Osho, which is actually a Japanese word for master. And this discourse was during a question and answer period. And the questioner, I'm just going to begin reading this because it's actually quite interesting. He says, I was brought up in the teachings of Rudolf Steiner. Although I believe him to be right in the way he shows that for the West, the possibility to free ourselves from Maya, and Maya means illusion, that's the Sanskrit word, is to learn to think in the right way. By doing this, and by meditating, he says we're able to lose our egos and find our I, the I. Your way seems different to me. Can you please advise me? I am somehow torn between you and the way Rudolf Steiner shows. Okay, so this is one of his followers, his devotees at this question and answer period, brought up in a family that was into Rudolf Steiner, and now he's torn because he's seen this difference between what Osho is teaching and what he learned from Rudolf Steiner. So Osho responds by saying, Rudolf Steiner was a great mind. I say a great mind, and mind as such has nothing to do with religion. Uses the word religion. I'm not sure why. I think really, he's speaking about spirituality. He says, a mind as such has nothing to do with spirituality. Rudolf Steiner was tremendously talented. In fact, it is very rare to find another mind to compare with Rudolf Steiner. He was so talented in so many directions and dimensions, it looks almost superhuman. A great logical thinker, a great philosopher, a great architect, a great educator, and so on and so forth. And whatsoever Steiner touched, he brought very novel ideas to that subject. Wherever he moved his eyes, he created new patterns of thought. He was a great man, a great mind, but mind as such, small or great, has nothing to do with religion or spirituality. Religion comes out of no mind. Religion is not a talent, it is your nature. If you want to be a great painter, you have to be talented. If you want to be a great poet, you have to be talented. If you want to be a scientist, of course, you have to be talented. But if you want to be religious, no special talent is needed. Anybody, small or great, who is willing to drop his mind enters into the dimension of the divine. And of course, great talented men find it very difficult to drop their minds. Their investment is bigger. For an ordinary man who has no talent, it is very easy to drop the mind. Even then, it seems so difficult. He has nothing to lose, still he goes on clinging. Of course, the difficulty is multiplied when you have a talented mind, when you are a genius, then your whole ego is invested in your mind. You cannot drop it. Rudolf Steiner founded a new movement called anthroposophy against theosophy. He was a theosophist in the beginning, then his ego started fighting other egos in the movement. He wanted to become the very head, the supreme most of the theosophical movement in the world head. That created trouble in Rudolf Steiner's mind, and he broke off from the movement. Rudolf Steiner has an appeal for the Western mind, and that is the danger. Because the Western mind is basically logic-oriented, reason, and thinking. He talks about it, and he says, this is the way for the Western mind. No, says Osho here. No, Eastern or Western, mind is mind. And the way is no mind. If you are Eastern, and you'll have to drop the Eastern mind. If you're a Western, you'll have to drop the Western mind. To move into meditation, mind as such has to be dropped. What is mind? Mind is a conditioning given to you by society. It is an overimposition on the original mind, which we call no mind. Just so that you don't get confused, all mind as such has to be dropped. The passage has to be completely empty for the divine mind to enter into you. Thinking is not meditation. Even right thinking is not meditation. Wrong or right, thinking has to be dropped. When there is no thought in you, no clouds of thinking in you, the ego disappears. And remember, when the ego disappears, the I is not found. The questioner says that Rudolf Steiner says, when the ego disappears, the I is found. No. When the ego disappears, I is not found. Nothing is found. Yes, exactly nothing is found. So here Osho's introducing some different ideas, and this may be bringing up thoughts for you, which is great. And I do want to have some conversation around this. But for tonight, any thoughts that come up have to be just questions. No statements, just questions. So he's talking about, let me just kind of reiterate some things. He's talking about the need for no mind, which you get to when you drop the mind. You drop the mind, you get to no mind, which he refers to as the original mind. And otherwise, mind is mind, whether it's Eastern or Western, it's all the same. And in meditation, we're striving, he says, striving for no mind. Because mind to him is just conditioning. The conditioning given by society. And this conditioning is an overimposition on the original mind, which he calls no mind. And that what is sought for is to make the passage empty, to get the mind out of the way, make the passage empty, and that the divine can then enter into you. So you have to drop your thinking of the mind, and with that, your ego will disappear. And he says, behind the ego is not the I. He says the I is not to be found, but actually nothing. Nothing is to be found. And that's really the objective, is to become a non-being, or what the Buddhists call anatta. whenever you decide what is wrong and what is right, you are there immediately between the wrong and the right as an ego. Between one thought and another thought exists the ego. Each thought brings its own ego and tension. Each thought is a tension. Even very ordinary, very, very innocent looking thoughts are tensions. You see, the garden is beautiful, and the sun is rising, and the birds are singing, and an idea arises. How beautiful. Even that is a tension. That's why if somebody is walking by your side, you will immediately say to him, look, what a beautiful morning. What are you doing? You are simply releasing the tension that has come through the thought. Beautiful morning. A thought has come. It has created tension around it. Your being is no more non-tense. It has to be released, so you speak to the other. It is meaningless because he is also standing just where you're standing. He also listening to the birds. He is also seeing the sunrise. He is also looking at the flowers. So what is the point of saying something like, this is beautiful? Is he blind? But that is not the point. You're not communicating any message to him. The message is as clear to him as to you. In fact, you are simply relieving yourself of a tension by saying it. The thought is dispersed into the atmosphere and you are relieved of the burden. So he's looking at how, first of all, to think in terms of right and wrong, this is ego. I have a question around that. Is it egotistical to think something's right or something's wrong? It's one of my questions. And he says every thought brings with it more ego. Well, I kind of agree with that, the ego does get built through thoughts and through thinking. But he says this creates a tension. With every thought, it's creating tension in your life, which to him is obviously something negative, that where you need to be relieved of the burden of the tension of a thought. And in this scenario, he says this is really of no value to have to share the thought with the person who's standing there looking at the sunrise with you. Remember, this is what meditation is all about. To destroy you so utterly that even if gods came, they cannot see you. They cannot find you. There is nobody inside to be found. That somebodyness is a sort of tension. That's why people who think they're somebodies are more tense. People who think that they are nobodies are less tense. People who have completely forgotten that they are tensionless. So remember, when your ego is lost, the I is not found. When the ego is lost, nothing is found. That nothingness, that purity of nothingness is your being, your innermost core, your very nature, your Buddha nature, your awareness, like a vast sky with no clouds gathered in it. So here he's saying the purpose of meditation is to completely destroy the self, to get rid of all ego, so that you actually don't exist anymore. The you, the I, the ego doesn't exist, and this will release all the tension that is otherwise experienced from being a thinking ego being. Is that clear?
Mhm.
Now listen to the question again. So he's quoting the questioner. I was brought up in the teachings of Rudolf Steiner, end quote. Yes, they are teachings. And what am I doing here? Is not teaching you anything. Rather, on the contrary, I'm taking all teachings away from you. I am not a teacher. I am not imparting knowledge to you. My whole effort is to destroy all that you think you know. My whole effort is to take all knowledge from you. Again, quoting the questioner. Although I believe Rudolf Steiner to be right in the way he shows that for the West, the possibility to free ourselves from Maya is to learn how to think in the right way. Osho. No. The way for the East or for the West is how to unlearn thinking, how to not think and just be. I'm not just picking on Osho. I'm doing this from Osho because he's, addressing the ideas of Rudolf Steiner. But he is largely an example of the Eastern spiritual perspective, which is kind of anti-thinking. That thinking is a problem. It's a Western contrivance that has evolved, but it's actually a block to the religious life and to being a spiritual being who can see beyond the illusions of Maya. And really the objective is just to be nothing. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, it is. I have actually more than one question. So I love what you just read and what Osho shared, and a lot of it I agree with, particularly if someone wants to commit their life to like a spiritual path, however you want to call it. My first question is when he speaks about mind and thinking, is there a distinction between the mind that thinks in a way that it accumulates or identifies with and therefore creates ego? And is there a distinction with the mind that simply perceives and like exists as the observer? Because if there is a distinction, then my understanding would be that we're being guided to simply be observers without the grasping and identification, because it's the grasping and the identification that creates the ego or adds to the ego and creates this tension. Because like what I'm understanding as being like no thought or no mind is to simply be as an observer, like a witnesser, like witness consciousness, some people call it, without the process of attachment or grasping or identification. All of those can come through as, for example, giving value, giving meaning, identifying with something. Like those are all the processes that I'm hearing is what Osho is guiding us to not do, because that's what creates the ego. But to simply be an observer, like a witnesser, that is not the mind that he's telling us to kind of drop. Did I get?
Well, that's great. I want at this point for people to bring forth questions, but I'm not going to answer it.
Okay. What do you mean?
All right, but I am going to continue.
Okay.
Unpacking more of what he has to say.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. To unlearn thinking, how to not think and just be. And it is needed more for the West than for the East, because in the West, the whole 2 millennia since Aristotle have been a conditioning you for thinking. Thinking has been the goal. The thinking mind has been the goal in the West, how to become more and more accurate, scientific in your thinking. The whole scientific world arose out of this effort, because when you're working as a scientist, you have to think. You have to work out in the objective world, and you have to find more accurate exact, valid ways of thinking. And it has paid off too much. Science has been a great success. So, of course, people think that the same methodology will be helpful when you go inwards. Rudolf Steiner thinks that in the same way as we have been able to penetrate into matter, the same method will help to go in. It cannot help, because to go in, one has to move in just the opposite direction, diametrically opposite. If thinking helps to know matter, no thinking will help to know yourself. Whatsoever has helped you to know the world better is going to be a barrier inside. Whatsoever helps you to know yourself will not necessarily help you to know matter. That's why the East could not develop science. The first glimpses of science had come to the East, but the East could not develop it. The East did not move in that direction. The basic rudimentary knowledge was developed in the East. For example, mathematical symbols, figures from 1 to 10 were developed in India. That made mathematics possible. It was a great discovery, but there it stopped. The beginning happened, but the East could not go very far in that direction. He's really juxtaposing the movement inward with the movement outward. The movement inward being, a religious nature, and the movement outward to be of a scientific nature. And he's saying that they're like apples and oranges. They're different things, and the capacities to go in one direction do not serve to go in another direction. He says science is a Western effort. Religion is an Eastern effort. In the West, even religion tries to be scientific. That was what Rudolf Steiner was doing, trying to make the religious approach more and more scientific. Because in the West, science is valuable. If you can prove that religion is also scientific, then religion also becomes valuable. So in the West, every religious person goes on trying to prove that science is not only science, religion is also a science. He's correct in what he's saying about the work of Rudolf Steiner is to try and bring religious movement closer to scientific activity. And this is why he called his work spiritual science. And in particular, he called his brand of it anthroposophy. But he was indeed saying that developing the scientific mind is actually good preparation for spiritual investigation. That to develop clarity and precision and accuracy through scientific and mathematical activity is a worthy preparation as you move your mind into the spheres of the astral planes and spirit, because it will make you less subject to the illusions of Maya and the temptations and seductions and so forth that are on these metaphysical planes. So Osho is correct in saying that this is the effort that Rudolf Steiner was doing when he was with the Theosophical Society and then the Anthroposophical Society. And the Theosophical Society was a movement that went to India and embraced Eastern teachings and philosophy and brought it to the West. Again, he's quoting the questioner. By doing this and by meditating, Rudolf Steiner says we are able to lose our ego and find our I. Osho. Rudolf Steiner does not know what meditation is. And what he calls meditation is concentration. He's completely confused. he calls concentration meditation. Concentration is not meditation. Concentration is, again, a very, very useful means for scientific thinking. It is to concentrate the mind, narrow the mind, focus the mind on a certain thing. But the mind remains, becomes more focused, becomes more integrated. Meditation is not concentrating on anything. In fact, it is relaxing, not narrowing. In concentration, there is an object. In meditation, there is no object at all. You are simply lost in an objectless consciousness, a diffusion of consciousness. Concentration is exclusive to something, and everything else is excluded from it. It includes only one thing. It excludes everything else. For example, if you're listening to me, you can listen in two ways. You can listen through concentration, then you are tense and you are focused on what I'm saying. Then the birds will be singing, but you will not listen to them. You'll think that it is a distraction. Distraction arises out of your effort to concentrate. Distraction is a byproduct of concentration. You can listen to me in a meditative way, then you're simply open, available. You listen to me and you listen to the birds also. And the wind passes through the trees and creates a sound. You listen to that also. Then you are simultaneously here. Then whatsoever is happening here, you are available to it without any mind of your own, without any choice of your own. He's saying that you become available to these things without a mind of your own. That you need to get rid of your mind so you can make yourself available to what is there. And without a choice. You don't make any choice or decision about what you're going to listen to. You just get rid of your mind and let it all come in as one thing, because it's all the same message anyways. It's God. But I ask, my question is, who is the you that does this? Who is the you that's getting rid of the mind and these barriers? Somehow, and he also says that this is done without a choice. Because choice is actually a function of the ego, as we'll learn. The ego makes choices and decisions. Just one more piece here, and then I'm going to give you the home plate for the week. What Rudolf Steiner calls meditation is nothing but concentration. And through concentration, you can lose the ego. Rudolf Steiner says through concentration, you can lose the ego and you will gain the I. And the I will be nothing but a very, very subtle ego. This is what Osho is saying. You will become a pious egoist. Your ego will now be decorated in religious language, but it will be there. So in the end here, he's really discounting the value of an ego. And that we can pretend to get rid of an ego, which is the objective in the Eastern spiritual perspective. We can pretend to get rid of it, but if we don't do it through this way, we're actually just decorating it and becoming a pious egoist. So really kind of coming to this head-to-head question around the ego, are we not? Whether it is of value or not. But as we close this, I do want to remind you that we are looking at a perspective. This is building upon the Jungian perspective that shows this evolution through time from a place of lesser ego to one of a growing ego with its capacities and functions. And what the teaching and the philosophy, the classic philosophy of India and the Vedic teachings and Hinduism are really from an earlier time period. And we're serving humanity at an earlier time on the evolutionary continuum, which may give some explanation as to why there seems to be this head-to-headness around the value of the ego. So next week will be the bookend to this, where we'll look at the Western spiritual perspective. And, we don't have Rudolf Steiner here to defend himself, but Rudolf Steiner did write about 35 books and gave over 6,000 lectures. So he did have lots to say, and fortunately, I've spent a lot of my life studying his work, so I will be able to introduce some of his ideas around this to unlock some of the mystery around understanding the ego at different points in time, and really what is needed to be not only a modern human, but a contemporary human in the Jungian sense.